Sometimes the best lessons come from watching someone who's mastered the game.
In 30 seconds, he had established that he was prudent and disciplined, was not going to be snowed by anybody or any kind of glossy sales pitch or whatever. And the other guy knew it without saying it. And I just remember being 20-something and thinking, well, that was kind of a clever way to approach it.
Today, I'm talking with Jonathan Victor. He's the founder and senior managing director of Balmoral Funds, a private equity firm based in Los Angeles. Jonathan co-founded the firm in 2005 and has spent the past 20 years investing in complex situations, especially when companies are in transition or distress. Before finance, he led businesses in tech and real estate.
We drew from our investors a total of about $25 million and returned north of $300 million. So it turns out it was okay.
This is Ordinary Greatness. It's not a show about building a career through privilege or connections, but about real people who achieved great things and the lessons they learned along the way. Whether you're just getting started on your career journey, considering a change, or interested in hearing stories of leaders who have made it, this is a show for you. What was it like when you were growing up?
For me, it was the greatest. The Midwest was a great place to be, and we kind of had a relatively idyllic childhood. We could come home from school and play outside and play in the street and knew the neighborhood kids and all that. We got lucky. It was a lot of fun.
You big family, brothers, sisters?
I have two older brothers, so I was the baby and always getting busted up and had to get stitched up usually on the weekends.
There was family business too, right?
It was called the Victor Paint Company, which was something actually started by my grandfather in the 30s. It's a classic immigrant story. My grandfather came to the States one step ahead of the Cossacks, sent for his then girlfriend, who became his wife, and my grandmother, probably in the late teens. They had 4 children, my father and his 3 sisters. And one day in the early 30s, when my father was about 8 years old and he was walking by the kitchen and overheard my grandfather come home, either the business partner had absconded with everything or just the times of the Depression, they were broke. It was all gone. It was all done. They were finished, did not know how he was going to feed the family or stay housed or any of that. And my grandmother from the old country patted him on the hand and said, "Don't worry, Sammy." And she went to the cupboard, and in a cookie jar, she had enough money that he could start a business called the Victor Paint Company that my grandfather grew and put 4 kids through college. And my father did have a knack for business, and so he opened a retail store, kind of like a Sherman-Williams paint, or here in California, Standard Brands paint. He opened 60-plus stores.
Wow. But you charted a different path.
The beginning of my career is a little bit like getting all dressed up for the party and then either not getting an invitation or not knowing the address of where to go. There were a lot of prestigious employers who would come to campus and interview, and which was then followed up with a whittling down, and they would typically then fly candidates to their headquarters, typically New York or major city. And so it normally was pretty easy, but through a kind of series of mishaps, places where I thought I very much wanted to go and where I thought they would want me, it didn't work out. And there are 2 assumptions that people make that I think are very wrong. And these are people both in these institutions and outside. Namely, that if somebody is in some of these Ivy League or fancy schools like Princeton, Oxford, Stanford, that somehow automatically they're really bright. Not true. I've been there. There are people there that will disappoint you if you assume that. And it's also the case that somehow, if you are bright, you're there, meaning those that didn't must be somehow a cut below. That's also not true. And some of the most intelligent people that I've met are people that, for any number of reasons, just didn't happen to go to those places. But they certainly help. They open a lot of doors.
Jonathan didn't land a big-name job straight out of school, and that early detour taught him something important. Credentials can get you in the door, but they don't guarantee anything. It was actually around this time Jonathan started working with Eli Broad. His approach to investing was a blend of Berkshire Hathaway's long-game thinking and the hands-on approach of activist investing. But the so-called School of Eli taught Jonathan a lot more than value-based investing advice. It left a clear impression on how Jonathan leads today.
So after a year and a half of that, I began looking, and that's when I went to work for this businessman named Eli Broad at a company at the time was called Kaufman and Broad. He was a very energetic, very intelligent, independent thinker who actually wound up building kind of two Fortune 500 companies in different industries. Originally, Kaufman and Broad was a home builder. But in 1971 or so, Eli wanted to diversify. He knew home builders were cyclical. He studied a bunch of industries and found that insurance was very, very stable. And by the time I got there, Kaufman and Broad Inc. was the one publicly traded entity, but it had a home builder and a life company. And then while I was there, we ultimately distributed all the shares of the home builder to the owners of Kaufman and Broad Inc. stock. So they had two shares of stock instead of one. One was the home builder and one was the remaining holding company, but now it just had one line of business, which was financial services and life insurance. That company ultimately got rebranded as Sun America. And that was the company Eli was really focused on more. And that was the company that he stayed with until around 2000 or so. It might have been 2001, but I think 99, 2000, 2001, that company got sold to AIG.
Are there things you learned in those years or you learned from Eli that you still go back to?
All the time. I feel like I went to the school of Eli. He was the master of breaking down a business into its essential parts, bringing kind of very basic, fairly well accepted metrics of how certain businesses should be valued, and very, very quickly could dissect a business, figure out a fundamental value for it, and would challenge you to say, why is this not what this business should be worth? But I do remember, even very early, if you don't mind, there was one anecdote that I remember partly because I've told it so many times, which is that we had somebody coming to the office that was looking for financing. We had these series of life insurance companies, and so we were essentially like a bank. And so we financed a lot of things. Our inventory was cash, basically. So we were buying bonds but making all kinds of investments. And somebody came in looking for financing, and Eli asked me to come in with him. I was still relatively new there. And this is now on Eli's home turf. And there's a conference room with a big, beautiful table you could land a 757 on. But basically, it would be almost the equivalent of somebody coming in for a loan.
Mm-hmm.
But it was going to be on a much larger scale and a commercial scale and so on. Fellow walks in with a beautiful suit, and Eli remarks about his watch. He says, gee, it's a beautiful watch you have on. And fellow said, gee, Eli, you have good taste. Let me tell you a little bit about that. And he started describing. It was a particular type of Cartier watch that was new and so on. And Eli cut him off and said, no, I'm familiar with the watch. I know all about it. And he proceeded to tell the guy as much or more about the watch than the guy knew. And he said, but Cartier really controls their distribution. I'm trying to get it wholesale. I was in Switzerland. I tried to get it at the factory. I've had friends in Singapore. He described a variety of ways that he was going to try to acquire this watch at basically half price. But he said he just couldn't do it. He was really marveling at Cartier and how well they controlled distribution, and said, by the way, how'd you do it? How'd you get the watch? And the guy sheepishly looked up and said, well, there's a Cartier store on Rodeo Drive, paid retail. And Eli shrugged and went, okay, sure, that's one way. And in that 60 seconds, I felt like the playing field just got tilted in Eli's face. Eli conveyed he was a value player. He didn't let go of money easily. He was going to be about value and bargain. Yes, he knew that was a nice watch, but he had discipline to wait until he could find a way to get it at a price that, sorry about that, that he could wait until he could find a way to pay for the watch. Now, Eli had 10 times, 100 times more money, both personally and then also in the company.
Just a principle, though.
But the principle was the principle. Okay, so now tell me about what you're here for. Tell me about your business and tell me what kind of financing. And without saying it directly, in 30 seconds, he had established that he was prudent and disciplined, was not going to be snowed by anybody or any kind of glossy sales pitch or whatever. And the other guy knew it without saying it.
Yeah,
and I thought, that was artful. It was really fast. It took 60 seconds. And it was so fast, I really don't think Eli was conscious about what he had done. He'd been in so many of these kinds of things. His gut was so good that it was just natural. And I just remember being 20-something and thinking, oh, that was kind of a clever way to approach it.
In the years after working with Eli, Jonathan stepped back from the investing world. He moved to California and spent several years working with his father. First in a furniture business, then in real estate development. Later, he joined the Irvine Company, one of the largest real estate firms in the state. But over time, the idea of building something of his own just kept pulling at him.
There were actually 4 of us who discussed starting a little private equity business. My brother, Skip, had a boutique investment bank at the time, which focused on financially troubled companies and their creditors. They tended to represent creditors committee as financial advisors in the context of a lot of large-scale bankruptcies. He had a partner, a financial partner in the firm, and the 2 of them also knew this third fellow. And the 4 of us were talking about the fact that their work was entirely advisory. They would get hired for a fee, and they would try to represent interests of different classes of creditors in these turnarounds. They were very well connected. They knew a lot of people in the industry. And so we talked about the fact that maybe we could raise a small amount of money, even though we didn't have a track record as investors. So I said that I was available. The three of them said they'd love to do it, but they each had day jobs and were busy, but that it was something they'd want to do. So we said, well, what if we say the four of us are doing it, but I'll be the only one that really does the work? And I prepared materials, and we went around as people that primarily the others knew, but I knew some folks as well. And we raised a small bit of money with the idea that that would enable us to create a track record. And if we did have an audited track record that was good, we could, as a group, raise substantially more money and have a real business. This was in 2005. We decided to call it Balmoral Funds because my brother Skip and I had grown up at 1550 Balmoral Drive in Detroit, Michigan. And it had the connotation of something old and stable, the way financial firms like to do.
Is that nerve-wracking, like knowing very directly the people whose money you're about to invest?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sweated over their money more than mine.
I believe that.
We we drew from our investors a total of about $25 million and returned north of $300 million. So it turns out it was okay. And we have raised our fourth fund, which is about $450 million, much larger than the 20 some odd we invested with the first fund.
If you're early in your career and feeling like the path isn't adding up just yet, just know that Jonathan was exactly in your shoes at one point too. He remembers being frustrated, even a little impatient, watching classmates land big jobs while his own route felt unclear. But now he sees that he was learning skills that laid the foundation for something entirely his own.
I admit to being a bit impatient, maybe even having a little ADD, but quite frankly, my intention was to follow a more traditional route. When that didn't pan out, I was very grumpy, and for many years, in my mind, thought about what the trajectory would have been or could have been somewhere else. And I was upset and angry about things not panning out. When I look back now and think in many ways, I got very lucky with the way things panned out, and panned out probably better than if I had followed a traditional route.
Balmoral's 20 years ago, 20-ish?
This year was our 20th anniversary.
Outstanding.
I know we're towards the end, but did you ever see the movie The Karate Kid?
Of course.
It was by no means my plan. You were talking about this career where I've done all these different things that turned out to lead up to this career in private equity. And looking back, I feel like I lived a little bit of the Karate Kid story, because the protagonist in that wanted to learn karate and goes to Mr. Miyagi, and he doesn't teach him karate, so it seems, in the beginning. Makes him wash his car, wax on and wax off, and then he has him drive a nail in, make a fence or whatever it was he put together. He did
sand the floor, paint the fence.
Exactly. Yeah. So he basically deconstructed all the component parts of karate, but didn't use the labels, didn't have it in the context, so he could focus on just those things. When I look back, the different jobs that I had, the analysis role of companies, both at the very first business I worked at, and then working with Eli, and we were looking to acquire companies and so on. So the analytical role, and also watching sort of a master at acquiring these things. Working at the Irvine Company, where it was a focus on finance and refinancing and restructuring a company from a financial point of view. There was a time when my father became ill, and I took over this furniture company in Michigan, which subsequently sold. But having an economic interest in a company in a town where I didn't live, 2,000 miles apart. It had management. You didn't want to micromanage, but you provided the oversight. It was your money at risk, etc. These were all component parts of what became private equity in terms of finding these deals, analyzing them, executing them, managing them, and then selling them. All those parts turned out to be areas of focus of prior jobs without being at a private equity firm before, or without being at an investment bank, or even without being at a law firm.
It's an amazing way to not be a cliche. You may be the first business person to reference Karate Kid and not The Godfather when it comes to a business story.
Well, Godfather gets quoted more than any other, but I can't think offhand of a good Hollywood story. I'd have to ask my brother.
Things change at such a fast rate now, or it seems like they do. But are there things that are evergreen for you? Things that, even if you're given advice today, would have been the same when you were starting out as it is now?
I think some of the advice that I remember hearing, I think in many respects is probably truer today. So I remember a number of people's parents who I consulted with were very explicit about saying, it is worth taking a risk when you're younger. You have much less to lose when you're younger than older. Take a shot on different things. Be willing to risk failure and so on at the beginning. And I think that's probably even more true today, because I think there are lots of second, third, fourth chances.
With so many years of study and work in such a wide range of industries, it's clear that Jonathan worked hard to get to where he is. But he's also honest that not everything was in his control. As we wrapped up our conversation, he shared one last reflection on the role of luck and the humility that comes with recognizing it.
I just feel very lucky. There was no guarantee that our first fund would be successful. And it turns out that not right out of school, but 20 years out of school, I stumbled into something that I think I have maybe the right disposition for, and turned out, unbeknownst to me at the time, that I wound up having good training for. And so those things combined with some good luck, because no matter how much we analyze them, all these investments are to some extent bets on the future. And while when we look backwards, of course, things were going to pan out the way they did.
Right.
But the fact is, the ball could have bounced differently all the time. There's so many things that could have happened that would have changed the trajectory. If we had not had the kind of results we did initially, we wouldn't be allowed to continue doing what we did. I feel very fortunate to have stumbled a little later in my career into something that I really enjoy doing, could wind up sort of, in a sense, working for myself rather than someone else, be able to build a team slowly, still a small team, being able to do what you like and have it work out financially is something for which I'm extremely grateful. And I recognize it was not preordained.
Did you read Buffett's final letter?
I have not. I have it, but
that good luck thing. Throughout all these conversations I'm having, and people who are successful, and I think you're here because I admire you, and the other people I'm reading because I admire you, and I think that is a really big takeaway, that people recognize their success in other people and in their teams, and also a little bit of good luck. And it's not all sunshine and rainbows, but good luck. Luck is
I don't mean to be a sappy patriot, but there's nothing I did that had me born in America versus other places, and not that other places are per se bad or anything like that, but the opportunities in other places are just not equivalent.
Yeah.
And the fact that, I wound up having parents that were supportive and loving wasn't anything that I had to do with. The same thing as having brothers who I'm lucky enough to be very close to and always have been. It's really hard to somehow think of one determining one's fate all by oneself. I don't think that we're all victims of circumstance, and I don't think we all have total control over everything. I don't know how to look at it as anything other than a mix.
This has been Ordinary Greatness. Subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming episodes, and please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn to let me know what you think of the show. Catch you next time.